The Galactic Council had spent 3,000 years compiling the list. 67 creatures, 67 absolute nightmares of evolution, 67 species that could not, would not, and should not ever be controlled by sentient life. And somehow, impossibly, a third-rate planet in an unremarkable spiral arm had turned every single one of them into pets. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Senior Administrative Compliance Officer Threndel Vox Murthix of the Intergalactic Bureau of Dangerous Fauna Classification did not consider himself an easily startled individual. In his 260 years of service, he had reviewed incident reports involving the crystalline maulers of Praxis 9, had personally witnessed a void screamer feeding frenzy through reinforced observation glass, and had once accidentally stepped on what he thought was a decorative mat, but turned out to be a sleeping phase raiser from the Deltaris cluster. That last incident had cost him 3 of his 7 primary manipulator appendages, which had taken 6 months to regenerate, and had taught him a very important lesson about checking before stepping. The point being that Threndel was not easily disturbed. His job required a certain level of desensitization to horror. So when he received the routine assignment to verify the taxonomic database entries for sector ZZ9 plural, Zed Alpha, subsection Terra, he expected nothing more than the usual tedium of checking that someone hadn't accidentally classified a herbivore as a carnivore or mislabeled the appropriate number of limbs on some unremarkable creature. What he did not expect was to have his entire understanding of biological possibility, evolutionary logic, and basic sanity shattered like a cheap observation dome in a meteor shower. The first anomaly appeared on a Tuesday, Galactic Standard Tuesday to be precise, which Threndel had always found to be the most disappointing day of the week. The kind of day where the lunch synthesizer would inevitably malfunction and produce something that technically qualified as nutrition, but tasted like regret and paperwork. He was 3 hours into his shift, reviewing the fauna entries for the planet designated as Earth, Terra, Sol 3, or as the locals apparently called it with absolutely no creativity whatsoever, Dirt. The humans had literally named their planet Dirt in their primary language. Threndel had encountered some species with limited imagination in his career, but naming your homeworld after the substance you walked on seemed particularly uninspired. The first entry seemed innocuous enough. Canis lupus, grey wolf, predator classification Theta 9, pack hunter, apex predator within its ecological niche. Status, endangered. Threndel paused. That last part seemed wrong. He cross-referenced the taxonomic code with the Bureau's master list. His 3 primary eye stalks extended in surprise. No, that couldn't be right. Canis lupus was entry number 24 on the absolute red list. The absolute red list, the one carved into crystalline memory banks designed to survive the heat death of the universe. The list that every spacefaring species was required to memorize before being granted access to interstellar travel. The list of creatures so fundamentally dangerous that encountering them was considered grounds for immediate planetary evacuation and long-range orbital sterilization protocols. And according to the Terra database, this creature was endangered. Threndel checked the entry again. Perhaps there had been a classification error. Perhaps Terra had a different creature that merely resembled the Canis lupus. The galaxy was a big place after all. Convergent evolution happened. Maybe this was just an unfortunate coincidence of naming conventions. He pulled up the genetic sequence, cross-referenced it with the master database, waited for the computer to process the comparison. The results came back with a soft chime that Threndel would later describe as the single most ominous sound he had ever heard, including that time he had been trapped in an elevator with a harmonizing death choir from the Resonance Nebula. Genetic match, 99.4%. Confirmed, Canis lupus entry 24, absolute red list. Threndel's manipulator appendages began to tremble slightly. There had to be an explanation. A reasonable, logical, scientifically sound explanation. Perhaps the humans had encountered this creature and wisely driven it to near extinction in a desperate bid for survival. Yes, that made sense. That was the only sensible response to encountering a red list predator on your homeworld. Kill it before it killed you. He opened the detailed species report, expecting to find documentation of a long and bloody war between humanity and the wolf packs. Tales of desperate last stands, fortified cities, weapons of mass destruction deployed against an implacable foe. What he found instead made his primary brain stem shut down for 3 full seconds, which was a new personal record. Status: domesticated. Population: estimated 400 million, living in close proximity with humans. Primary function: companionship, emotional support, recreation, labor assistance. Threndel read it again, then a third time. Then he activated his auxiliary brainstem because his primary one seemed to have gotten stuck on the word companionship and refused to process any further information. 400 million? They were living with them? They had turned entry 24 of the absolute red list into what? He scrolled down, looking for any indication that this was some sort of translation error. Perhaps companionship meant something different in human languages. Perhaps it was a euphemism for imprisoned in maximum security containment facilities pending execution. Perhaps the humans had a very dark sense of humor about their ongoing extinction-level crisis. The accompanying image file loaded. Threndel stared at it for a very long time. It showed a small human juvenile, no more than 5 solar cycles old by his estimation, with its arms wrapped around the neck of a massive Canis lupus specimen. Both the human and the wolf had their mouths open in what the caption identified as smiling. The wolf's tongue was hanging out. The human was making direct eye contact with the camera with an expression that could only be described as innocent joy. The caption read, "Bella and her best friend Rocky at the park." The park? They took them to parks. Threndel checked the definition of park in the human lexicon. Open recreational spaces, where children played, with the wolves. Who were their best friends? His secondary brainstem joined his primary one in complete shutdown. He was now operating on his tertiary brainstem, which was really only designed for emergency life support and had no business trying to process this level of existential horror. Threndel did what any rational being would do when confronted with information that fundamentally violated everything they thought they knew about the universe. He assumed the database had been corrupted. Obviously, that was the only explanation. Some cosmic ray had struck the server. A solar flare had scrambled the data. A bored intern had been playing a prank. These things happened in large, bureaucratic organizations. He would simply flag the entry for review and move on with his day. Except he couldn't move on, because if the wolf entry was corrupted, he needed to check the other entries, just to be thorough, just to confirm that this was an isolated incident and not indicative of a larger systemic problem. He opened the next predator file, Felis catus. Small feline predator, solitary hunter, known for exceptional stealth capabilities and disproportionate killing efficiency relative to body mass. Status: endangered, domesticated. Population: estimated 600 million, entry 31 of the absolute red list. The Felidae minimus, known across 12 star systems as the Silent Death. A creature so perfectly evolved for killing that it spent 2/3 of its life in voluntary stasis simply because it was so efficient at hunting that it ran out of things to kill and got bored. And the humans had 600 million of them, in their homes, where they slept. The image file for this entry showed a Felis catus specimen lounging across a human's chest while the human operated some sort of electronic device. The caption read, "Mr. Whiskers helps me work from home." The creature's eyes were half closed in what the description called contentment. Its claws, which Threndel knew from the classified reports could slice through reinforced polymer like it was Jovian cloud vapor, were retracted. The human was touching it, voluntarily. Threndel's tertiary brainstem began making a high-pitched whining noise that his species typically reserved for imminent death situations. He opened another file, and another, and another. Equus Caballus, entry 52. The hoof-strike beast, capable of delivering kicks with enough force to shatter body armor. The humans rode them. For fun, they put their children on their backs and called it riding lessons. Apis mellifera, entry 63, the golden swarm. Colonial insects that defended their territories with suicidal aggression and toxin-coated piercing implements. The humans kept them in boxes in their gardens. They stole the creature's food stores and called it honey and put it on toast. Suscrofa domesticus, Bos taurus, Gallus domesticus, on and on and on. Every single one a creature from the absolute red list. Every single one classified as domesticated. Every single one living in close proximity to humans in numbers that made Threndel's manipulator appendages go numb just thinking about them. The humans hadn't just encountered the red list predators. They hadn't fought desperate wars of survival against them. They hadn't even achieved some sort of uneasy truce or coexistence at a safe distance. No, the humans had looked at the most dangerous creatures evolution had ever produced, creatures that had caused the extinction of multiple civilizations, creatures that the Galactic Council had classified as unkillable apex predators. And the humans had said, "Oh, cute. We're keeping them, in our houses, with our babies." Threndel sat very still at his workstation for approximately 20 minutes, during which time his colleagues noted that he appeared to have entered some sort of catatonic state. His eye stalks had retracted fully into his head. His breathing had slowed to barely detectable levels. His chromatic display patches, which usually cycled through a pleasant blue-green spectrum, had turned a shade of grey-beige that the medical database would later identify as profound psychological distress. When he finally emerged from his stupor, Threndel did something he had never done in 260 years of government service. He flagged the entire Terra file with a priority alpha review code, submitted a request for immediate personal leave, went home, and consumed an entire bottle of Andorian brandy that he'd been saving for his retirement, which, given what he'd just discovered, might need to happen considerably sooner than planned. But Threndel was, despite everything, a professional, and professionals didn't let existential horror get in the way of proper bureaucratic protocol. So the next morning, nursing what humans would call a hangover and what his species called voluntary neural suppression aftermath, he filed a formal request for a Category 5 in-person inspection of the Terra system. No advance notice, no diplomatic warning. Just a surprise inspection to verify whether the database was telling the truth, or whether he was about to become the laughingstock of the entire galactic civil service. The request was approved in 4 hours, which was actually a new speed record for the Bureau. Apparently, when you flag an entire planet with enough red list violations to cause a mass extinction event, people take notice. 3 weeks later, Threndel found himself aboard the inspection shuttle Bureaucratic Necessity, approaching the 3rd planet of the Sol system. He had brought a full hazard suit, a personal shield generator, an emergency beacon, and a last will and testament which he'd updated the night before to specify that if he died on this mission, his collected works on proper taxonomic classification standards should be published posthumously so that future generations could learn from his sacrifice. His pilot, a cheerful Vexillian named Torple, who seemed disturbingly unconcerned about their destination, initiated the descent sequence. "Beautiful planet," Torple chirped, his 4 mandibles clacking together in what his species considered a smile. "Lots of blue, very aesthetic. I've heard the locals are quite friendly." Threndel made a non-committal noise that came out somewhere between a groan and a whimper. "Friendly, yes, friendly. That's exactly how he would describe a species that casually lived alongside 67 different types of unkillable murder beasts. Friendly. They had filed their arrival with what the humans called air traffic control, which was apparently a system for managing the absolutely insane amount of flying vehicles that buzzed around the planet's surface like intoxicated insects. The air traffic controller, a human female with a pleasant voice, had directed them to something called Charles de Gaulle International Airport in a place called Paris, France. As they descended through the atmosphere, Threndel stared out the viewport at the planet below. It looked normal. Blue oceans, green and brown continents, white clouds, no visible signs of planetary-scale warfare, no massive fortifications, no orbital defense platforms. Just a regular, boring, life-bearing planet going about its business, which somehow made everything worse. How could a planet that looked this normal be home to such madness? They landed without incident, which Threndel found vaguely disappointing because at least a landing emergency would have given him a legitimate reason to abort the mission. Instead, they touched down smoothly on something called a runway, which was essentially a very long, very flat piece of pavement that humans used for their atmospheric vehicles. The shuttle door opened. Threndel took a deep breath of recycled air from his suit, checked his shield generator one more time, verified that his emergency beacon was functioning, and stepped out onto the surface of Earth. Nothing immediately tried to kill him. This was a good start. A surprising start, but good nonetheless. What did try to approach him was a human male in what appeared to be an official uniform of some kind. The human was smiling, which Threndel had learned from his pre-mission research meant that the creature was either A, genuinely pleased, B, being polite, or C, about to engage in combat. Human facial expressions were confusing. "Welcome to Earth," the human said, extending one of its manipulator appendages in what Threndel recognized as a handshake gesture. "I'm Inspector Gauthier from Customs and Border Protection. Are you here for business or pleasure?" Threndel stared at the offered appendage. In his research, he had learned that humans used physical contact as a greeting, physical contact with strangers. He very carefully extended one of his own appendages and briefly touched the human's hand, then retracted it immediately. "Business," Threndel managed to say, his translator rendering his clicking speech into French-accented English. "I am here to conduct a routine fauna classification verification inspection on behalf of the Galactic Council." Inspector Gautier's smile widened. "Ah, a scientist! How wonderful! Will you be needing ground transportation? I can arrange for a vehicle." That would be acceptable," Threndel said. His eye stalks were swiveling around, scanning for threats, specifically scanning for any of the 67 death machines that supposedly lived on this planet in close proximity to humans. So far, he saw only other humans, moving about their business with what appeared to be complete disregard for their own mortality. "Excellent." Gautier pulled out a small electronic device and began tapping on it with his thumbs. "I'll have a car brought around. In the meantime, would you like some coffee? We have an excellent cafe in the terminal." Threndel had no idea what coffee was, but he was reasonably certain he didn't want to consume any Earth-based substances until he had them thoroughly analyzed for toxins, parasites, and mind control agents. "No, thank you. I prefer to begin my inspection as soon as possible." Of course, very professional." Gautier made a few more taps on his device. "The car should be here in just a few minutes. Feel free to wait inside where it's warm. It's a bit chilly today, only about 5 degrees. 5 degrees. Threndel's suit computer helpfully converted that to galactic standard. 278 Kelvin. The human considered this chilly. Threndel's homeworld maintained a comfortable ambient temperature of 310 Kelvin. These humans lived in what his species would consider Arctic conditions and called it a bit chilly. He was beginning to understand why they could coexist with apex predators. They were apparently made of hardier stuff than most civilized species. The car arrived, which turned out to be a wheeled ground vehicle operated by another smiling human, this one female with bright red pigmentation on her head fur. "Bonjour, where can I take you today?" Threndel climbed into the vehicle, which seemed distressingly flimsy compared to the armored transports he was used to. "I need to visit a location where I can observe typical human-fauna interactions, a residential area with families." The driver's smile somehow got wider. "Oh, you want to see a nice neighborhood? I know just the place. My sister lives in a lovely suburb just outside the city. Very family-friendly, lots of kids and dogs." "Dogs," she said, dogs, plural, lots of them. Threndel's primary brainstem briefly considered shutting down again, but his tertiary brainstem, which had been doing most of the work lately anyway, told it to pull itself together. He was a professional. He could handle this. "That would be perfect," he said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but perfect. The drive took approximately 30 minutes, during which the driver, whose name was apparently Colette, cheerfully pointed out various landmarks and made small talk about the weather, her sister's new baby, and something called traffic that seemed to be a constant source of frustration for humans. Threndel barely registered any of it. He was too busy staring out the window at the streets, where he could see multiple humans walking alongside medium-sized furry quadrupeds attached to flexible tethers. They were everywhere, just walking around, in public, like it was normal. "Are those—" Threndel's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Are those Canis lupus specimens?" "Oh, the dogs. Yes, such cute doggies." Colette waved at a passing human who was being pulled along by a particularly large specimen. "That's a German Shepherd. Beautiful breed, very loyal. My sister has a golden retriever named Biscuit. Sweetest dog you'll ever meet." Sweet. She called a red list predator sweet. Threndel felt his auxiliary brain stem beginning to make that high-pitched whining noise again. They arrived at what Colette called a typical suburban street. Rows of individual human dwellings, each with a small plot of vegetation in front. Children playing in the street. And dogs. So many dogs. At least 6 visible from the car, and those were just the ones outside. "Here we are. I'll wait with the car. Take your time." Colette pulled out her electronic device and began tapping at it, apparently unconcerned about leaving an alien visitor to wander around unsupervised in a neighborhood full of red list predators. Threndel stepped out of the car. His suit's threat detection system immediately lit up like a supernova. Multiple large predators detected. Exercise extreme caution. Recommend immediate evacuation. He ignored it. He was here to do a job, even if that job was apparently going to get him killed by a creature that the Galactic Council had classified as biologically incapable of behavioral modification through standard domestication techniques. A small human juvenile, perhaps 6 or 7 solar cycles old, was playing with a bright red sphere in front of one of the dwellings. Sitting next to the child, tongue lolling out of its mouth in that disturbing smile expression, was an absolutely massive Canis lupus specimen. Easily 45 kilograms, thick fur, powerful jaw muscles, eyes that tracked the bouncing sphere with predatory focus. Threndel approached slowly, his shield generator humming at maximum power. The child noticed him first. "Wow, are you an alien? Cool." The dog's head swiveled toward Threndel, its ears perked up, its eyes locked onto him. Every single one of Threndel's threat assessment systems screamed at him to activate the emergency beacon and run. The dog's tail began to wag. Its mouth opened wider in what Threndel's research suggested was a friendly expression, but which looked to him like a prelude to having his head removed from his body. It stood up, started walking toward him. "Wait!" Threndel shouted, backing up. "Please remain where you are. I am not threatening your territory. I am a neutral observer." The child laughed. Mister, why are you yelling? Luna just wants to say hi. She's friendly. Luna. They had named it. This instrument of death had a name, and it was getting closer. The dog reached Threndel and did something that his threat assessment systems had absolutely no protocol for. It sat down, directly in front of him, and stared up at him with what could only be described as expectation. She wants you to pet her, the child explained helpfully. Just put your hand on her head and scratch behind her ears. She loves that. Pet, touch, the creature, the apex predator, with his hand, the appendage he needed for literally everything. I don't think that's advisable, Threndel stammered. This creature is classified as extremely dangerous. The child tilted her head in confusion. Luna? Dangerous? She's not dangerous. She's a good girl. Aren't you, Luna? Aren't you a good girl? The dog's tail began wagging so hard that its entire posterior half was wiggling. It made a sound that Threndel's translator unhelpfully rendered as enthusiastic vocalization of joy. The child's parent emerged from the dwelling, a human female carrying a small container of some sort. Amelie, who are you talking to? Oh. She noticed Threndel and smiled. Of course she smiled. All these humans did was smile in the face of mortal danger. Hello, are you visiting our planet? How exciting! Would you like some cookies? I just baked them. Cookies. She was offering him cookies while a red-list predator sat less than 1 meter from his position. This was insanity. I am conducting an official inspection, Threndel managed to say, his voice climbing several octaves. I am here to verify the classification status of certain species on your planet. Specifically, I need to understand how your population manages to coexist with creatures that are classified as apex predators. The woman looked puzzled. Apex predators? You mean like bears? Oh, we don't usually have bears in the suburbs. Although there was that one time a bear got into the Rousseau's garbage bins down the street. Poor thing was just hungry. Animal control relocated it safely. No! Threndel pointed at the dog, which was still sitting patiently, still wagging its tail, still looking at him with those expectant eyes. This creature, Canis lupus, entry 24 on the absolute red list. How are you alive? Both the woman and the child stared at him in confusion. Then the woman began to laugh. Not a nervous laugh, not a frightened laugh, a genuine from-the-abdomen laugh that suggested she found his distress amusing. You mean Luna? Oh my goodness, you think dogs are dangerous? That's adorable. No. Dogs are completely safe. We've been breeding them for thousands of years. They're man's best friend. Here, I'll show you. Before Threndel could activate his shield generator, before he could engage his emergency beacon, before he could do anything, the woman walked right up to the creature, bent down, and wrapped her arms around its neck. The dog's tail went into overdrive. It began making happy whining noises and licking the woman's face with its tongue, which Threndel knew for a fact contained enough bacteria to fell a Gravixian battlecruiser. See? Completely harmless. Luna wouldn't hurt a fly. Well, she might hurt a fly. She likes to chase them. But she's never hurt a person. She's wonderful with children. Amelie loves her to pieces. Don't you, sweetie? I love Luna, the child shouted, joining her mother in what appeared to be a group embrace of the predator. She sleeps in my bed. It sleeps in the child's bed, the apex predator, in the bed, where the child is unconscious and vulnerable. Threndel's primary brainstem gave up entirely. His secondary brainstem filed for early retirement. His tertiary brainstem, the only one still functioning, decided that the only rational response to this situation was to sit down on the ground and accept that everything he thought he knew about the universe was wrong. He sat, right there on the human's front lawn. His shield generator powered down. His threat assessment system stopped bothering to alert him because literally everything on this planet was a threat, and there was no point in being selective about it anymore. The woman looked concerned. "Oh dear. Are you all right? You look a bit, well, it's hard to read alien expressions, but you seem distressed. Would you like that cookie now? And maybe some water?" "I think," Threndel said slowly, "I need to speak with someone who can explain to me exactly how your species accomplished this. Because according to every scientific principle known to the Galactic Council, what I am witnessing right now is impossible." The woman helped him up, which was surprisingly gentle considering humans were apparently insane. "Well, I'm not a scientist, but my brother-in-law Claude is a veterinarian. He could probably explain it better than I could. He's just a few streets over. Let me give him a call." A veterinarian, someone who specialized in the medical care of these creatures, who chose to work with them professionally, by choice. 20 minutes later, Threndel found himself sitting in the dwelling of Claude Mercier, doctor of veterinary medicine, surrounded by at least 15 different Canis lupus specimens of various sizes, all of whom seemed thrilled about having a visitor. They pressed against his suit, they wagged their tails, they made those happy vocalizations. One particularly small specimen, which Claude called a chihuahua, would not stop making high-pitched aggressive noises that his translator rendered as territorial challenge display, but which Claude assured him meant, "She likes you." How could aggressive territorial challenges mean affection? Nothing about this planet made sense. Claude, a middle-aged human with grey pigmentation in his head fur, listened patiently as Threndel explained his mission. The classification list, the red list, the absolute impossibility of what the humans had done. When Threndel finished, Claude nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, I see the confusion. Yes, wolves and dogs share a common ancestor, but you have to understand, we didn't exactly domesticate wolves in their current form. The process started around 30,000 years ago. We formed a sort of mutual partnership with the friendlier wolves. They helped us hunt. We gave them food and shelter. Over thousands of generations, we selectively bred the ones with more docile temperaments, the ones that were more social, more willing to cooperate, and gradually, very gradually, we ended up with modern dogs. 30,000 years! Threndel's eye stalks extended to their maximum length. "You've been doing this for 30,000 years. Well, give or take a few millennia. The archaeological record isn't perfectly precise, but yes, it's been a very long process. Dogs were actually our first domesticated animal. After that, we got pretty good at it." Claude scratched one of the larger dogs behind its ears, the dog's eyes half closed in obvious pleasure. "We've domesticated dozens of species since then. Cats, horses, cattle, pigs, chickens, sheep, goats, rabbits, guinea pigs, ferrets, even some fish and insects. But the danger, the genetic predisposition toward aggression, the killing instincts." Claude smiled, that same calm, pleasant smile that every human on this planet seemed to have mastered. "Oh, those instincts are still there to some degree. Dogs still have prey drive, cats are still hunters, but we've learned to channel those instincts in safe directions. We give them toys to chase instead of prey. We train them to follow commands. We socialize them from a young age so they learn to live peacefully with humans and other animals. It's all about understanding their psychology and working with their nature, not against it." "But what about accidents? Surely there must be incidents, attacks, fatalities." "Well, yes. Occasionally things go wrong," Claude admitted. "Dogs do bite sometimes, especially if they're mistreated or poorly trained or feel threatened. We have around 30 to 50 fatal dog attacks per year worldwide. But given that there are nearly 1 billion dogs living with humans, that's a statistical anomaly. You're more likely to be killed by a falling coconut." "Falling coconuts? They had killer plants too?" Threndel stood up abruptly, dislodging at least 3 dogs who had been leaning against his legs. "I need to expand my investigation. I need to see other species, the felines, the equines, the Apis mellifera." Claude's eyebrows rose. You know the Latin name for honeybees. I'm impressed. Most people just call them bees. Well, I don't keep bees myself, but my neighbor Philippe has several hives. I'm sure he'd be happy to show you. He's very passionate about apiculture. Passionate about keeping colonial stinging insects. Passionate. An hour later, Threndel stood in Philippe's garden, wearing a protective suit that Philippe had assured him was perfectly safe, but which seemed distressingly flimsy compared to the military-grade armor Threndel would have preferred when approaching entry 63 of the Red List. Philippe himself wore only a slightly thicker version of the suit, with a mesh covering his face. He moved among the white boxes, which he called hives, with the casual confidence of someone who had not read the incident reports about Apis mellifera defensive swarms. "These are my girls," Felipe said proudly, opening one of the boxes to reveal thousands of the creatures crawling over geometric wax structures. "Aren't they beautiful? This hive produced 20 kilos of honey last season, and the pollination services they provide to my garden are invaluable." The insects buzzed loudly. Threndel's suit sensors detected approximately 8,000 individual organisms within a 3-meter radius, each one capable of delivering a venomous sting. 8,000, and Philippe was reaching into their home with his bare hands. "The key to working with bees is staying calm," Philippe explained, lifting out one of the wax structures. It was covered in bees. They crawled over his gloved hands. Several flew up to investigate his face mesh. "If you're calm, they're calm. Bees can sense fear through the pheromones you release. If you're stressed, they get stressed. If you're relaxed, they're much less likely to sting. They can sense fear." Threndel took several steps backward. "They have chemical detection of emotional states." "Well, yes. Remarkable, isn't it? They're incredibly sophisticated creatures. They communicate through dance. They make collective decisions. They can recognize individual human faces. Absolutely fascinating insects." One of the bees landed on Threndel's suit, then another, then 5 more. Within seconds, he had at least 20 of them crawling across his helmet. "Oh no, oh no, oh no, they're on me, they're on me." Threndel began backing away rapidly, trying very hard not to flail his appendages because Felipe had said something about sudden movements being bad. "It's all right. They're just curious. You're a new thing in their environment. They're investigating. Just stay still and they'll lose interest." Stay still. While 20 Red List organisms crawled across his face, Threndel stayed still. It was possibly the hardest thing he had ever done in his entire life, including that time he had to sit through a 6-hour budget allocation meeting. The bees crawled, they buzzed, they seemed to be communicating with each other through some sort of waggling motion. And then, just as Felipe had predicted, they lost interest and flew back to their hive. Threndel discovered that his suit's waste management system had earned its hazard pay for the day. "You see," Felipe beamed at him. "Perfectly safe. Now would you like to try some honey? I have several varieties. The spring wildflower honey is particularly good." That evening, back in his shuttle, Threndel sat very still and stared at his datapad. He had witnessed more impossible things in one day than he had in his entire career. He'd been surrounded by Red List predators. He had been investigated by venomous colonial insects. He had drunk a beverage called tea that the humans claimed came from plant leaves and tasted surprisingly pleasant despite being an alien substance that could have contained literally anything. He had met at least 40 humans, and not a single one had seemed concerned about living alongside creatures that should have driven them to extinction. And he still had 63 more Red List entries to verify. Torpel poked his head into the cabin. "How was your first day on Earth?" Threndel made a noise that his translator gave up, trying to render into any known language. "That good, huh?" Torpel's mandibles clacked cheerfully. "I've been reading about this planet while you were gone. Did you know they have a thing called horseback riding, where they sit on top of large ungulates and make them run for recreation? I want to try it." "No!" Threndel's voice came out as a shriek. "No, you will not try anything on this planet. We are going to complete this inspection as quickly as possible, and then we are going to leave and never come back." But even as he said it, Threndel knew that his investigation was far from over. Because if the humans had domesticated Entry 24, Entry 31, Entry 52, and Entry 63, that meant they had probably domesticated all of them. Every single one. He pulled up the next file on his datapad. Suscrofa domesticus, the territorial tusk beast, known for aggressive charging behavior, impressive strength, and an absolutely foul temperament. Status: domesticated. Primary function: food production. Food production? They were eating them? Threndel discovered that his tertiary brainstem was making that whining noise again. The next morning, Claude picked him up in his personal vehicle. He had offered to serve as Threndel's guide to typical human agricultural practices, which was apparently a euphemism for places where humans keep enormous numbers of red list species in concentrated populations. They drove for about an hour into what Claude called the countryside, which seemed to consist of vast open spaces covered in vegetation and divided by primitive barriers that Claude called fences. Threndel could see large animals grazing in many of the enclosed spaces. Very large animals. "That's the Dubois farm up ahead." Claude pointed to a cluster of buildings. "They're a traditional family farm. They have cattle, pigs, chickens, a few goats and some sheep. Nice variety. Old man Dubois has been farming that land for 50 years. 50 years of living in close proximity with multiple red list species. And the human had survived to old age." They pulled into a dirt path leading to the buildings. Threndel could see the animals more clearly now. Large quadrupeds with distinctive black and white coloration patterns. Bos Taurus, Entry 41 on the red list. The horned stampede beast, capable of trampling a Xanthian battle mech into scrap metal. There were dozens of them, just standing around, eating grass, like they didn't have a care in the universe. An elderly human male emerged from one of the buildings, wiping his hands on his clothing. He had very little pigmentation left in his head fur, and his face was deeply lined with what Threndel's research suggested were wrinkles caused by prolonged sun exposure and age. He was smiling. Of course, he was smiling. "Claude, good to see you. And you've brought a visitor, an alien visitor. Well, I'll be. Never thought I'd see the day." The old human extended his hand. Threndel shook it briefly. "Name's Maurice Dubois. Welcome to my farm. Claude says you're here to learn about how we manage our animals." "Yes," Threndel managed. "I am attempting to understand how your species has achieved what every other civilization in the galaxy considers impossible. You live alongside creatures that should have killed you generations ago." Maurice laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "Killed us? These old girls?" He gestured to the cattle, several of which had wandered closer to investigate the new arrival. "They're about as dangerous as a bag of marshmallows, gentle as can be. Come on, I'll introduce you." Before Threndel could protest, Morris had opened a gate and was walking directly into the enclosure with the cattle. Claude followed without hesitation. Threndel stood frozen at the gate, his every instinct screaming at him that walking into an enclosure with 40 Bos Taurus specimens was suicide. "Coming?" Morris called back. "They're curious about you. They want to say hello." No. No, no, no. This was not in his job description. This was not what he signed up for when he joined the Intergalactic Bureau of Dangerous Fauna Classification. He was supposed to review databases, look at images, maybe observe from a safe distance through reinforced glass. But he had come all this way. He had survived yesterday. He was a professional. Threndel stepped through the gate. His shield generator hummed reassuringly. His emergency beacon was armed and ready. His threat assessment systems were having what could only be described as a complete nervous breakdown. The cattle noticed him immediately. Several began walking toward him. Each one was massive, easily 600 kilograms, with horns, pointed keratin-based weapons growing directly out of their skulls. The nearest one reached him and did something unexpected. It lowered its head and made a long, low sound that his translator rendered as greeting vocalization. Then it began licking his suit with a tongue approximately the size of his torso. "That's Bessie," Maurice said fondly. "She's always been friendly. Bit too friendly sometimes. She once knocked over a whole bucket of feed pellets trying to get head scratches." The creature was trying to get physical contact from him. The cattle had social bonding behaviors with humans. "They're ruminants, you see," Maurice explained, gently pushing Bessie's head to the side so Threndel could breathe. "Herbivores. They eat grass and hay, turn it into milk and meat. We've been raising cattle for about 10,000 years now. Same principle as dogs. We selected the calmer ones, the ones that didn't mind being around humans, bred them generation after generation. Now we've got lovely, docile creatures that are easy to handle." "But the horns," Threndel protested. They have weapons." "Oh, these girls, they've been dehorned. We remove the horn buds when they're calves. Safer for them and for us. Of course, not all breeds have their horns removed. Highland cattle keep theirs, but they're just as gentle. The horns are mostly for show at that point." "They modified the creatures? They performed surgical alterations?" Maurice led him through the rest of the farm. The pigs, which were Sus scrofa domesticus, entry 32 on the red list, and which were apparently excellent mothers, despite being classified as extremely aggressive when defending territory. The chickens, which were Gallus domesticus, descended from jungle fowl that had caused the evacuation of 2 colony worlds. The sheep, the goats, the ducks, every single one a red list entry, every single one living peacefully in enclosures, every single one tame. They ended up in Maurice's kitchen, where his wife Marguerite served them something called coffee and croissants. The coffee was a dark, bitter beverage that contained a stimulant compound called caffeine. The croissants were made from grain flour and animal fat. Both were delicious in a way that made Threndel deeply uncomfortable because he had been taught never to consume anything from a planet that could kill him. "So what I don't understand," Threndel said, sipping his coffee cautiously, "is why? Why would you do this? Why would you take creatures that could kill you and bring them into your homes, your farms, your lives? What possessed your ancestors to look at a wolf and think, yes, I want that near my children?" Maurice and Marguerite exchanged glances. Claude smiled into his coffee cup. Finally, Maurice spoke. "You ever been lonely, son?" What? Lonely. Alone. Isolated. It's a big, scary universe out there. Even here on Earth it could be harsh, still can be in places. Back when we were just starting out as a species, trying to survive, we were vulnerable, small, not much in the way of natural defenses. So we looked around at what DID have defenses, what was good at surviving, and we thought, what if we could be friends? Friends! Threndel's voice climbed several octaves. You domesticated red list predators because you wanted friends? Well, not just friends, Marguerite interjected. Also help. Wolves helped us hunt. Cattle gave us milk and meat. Horses let us travel farther and carry more. Chickens gave us eggs. It was mutually beneficial. We gave them food and shelter and protection. They gave us companionship and help with survival. Everyone won. But the risk? Sure, there was risk, Maurice acknowledged. Still is, sometimes. But humans are pretty good at managing risk. We're problem solvers. We see a challenge and we figure out how to overcome it. A wolf is dangerous. Train it. Breed the dangerous parts out. Turn it into something we can live with. A wild bull is aggressive. Selectively breed for docility. Castrate the really aggressive males. Build strong fences. Learn their behavior patterns. Adapt. We're very good at adapting, Claude added quietly. It's kind of our thing. Threndel sat in silence for a long moment, processing this. The humans hadn't conquered the Red List species through superior technology or overwhelming force. They had done it through patience, through observation, through building relationships that spanned thousands of generations. They had looked at creatures that should have been their extinction and said, what if we could help each other instead? It was possibly the most insane survival strategy Threndel had ever encountered. And it had worked. For 30,000 years, it had worked. I need to see more, Threndel said finally. I need to understand the full scope of this. How many species have you domesticated? What's the upper limit? Maurice and Claude exchanged glances again. Well, Claude said slowly, that's a bit hard to quantify. Depends on how you define domestication. But we've got somewhere between 20 and 40 species that we've fully domesticated for various purposes. Food, labor, companionship, pest control, transportation. Then there are partially domesticated species, animals we keep in captivity but haven't fully integrated into human society. And then there are the animals we're currently in the process of domesticating. You're still doing this. You haven't stopped. Why would we stop? Marguerite looked genuinely puzzled. It's been very successful. Plus, some species are just so interesting. Have you ever seen a fox? They're beautiful. There's a breeding program in Russia that's been working on domesticating them, already showing promising results. Threndel pulled up his datapad and began scrolling through the red list. Vulpes vulpes, entry 59, the Scarlet Shadow, known for its cunning and ability to infiltrate secure facilities. He looked up at the humans. You're domesticating those. They're very clever, Claude said enthusiastically, and quite beautiful. The Russian researchers have been selecting for friendly behavior. Within just a few generations, they had foxes that wagged their tails and sought out human affection. It's a fascinating example of how behavioral selection can lead to rapid physical and psychological changes. Within a few generations? Threndel's datapad slipped from his appendage. You can do this in generations, not thousands of years. Well, it depends on the species and what traits you're selecting for, Claude explained. The process is actually much better understood now than it was when we first domesticated wolves. We know about genetics. We can identify specific genes associated with tameness and aggression. We can accelerate the process considerably if we want to. Though most modern domestication efforts are done for conservation or research purposes rather than practical needs, we've got most of our bases covered with the species we've already domesticated. Most of their bases covered. They had domesticated so many red list species that they were running out of practical uses for new ones and were now doing it for entertainment and scientific curiosity. Show me more, Threndel said, his voice barely a whisper. I need to see all of it, every species, every location. I need to document this properly because no one on the Galactic Council is going to believe my report without extensive evidence. Over the next 3 weeks, Threndel toured Earth. He visited stables where humans kept Equus Caballus and rode them for recreation and sport. He observed a dog show where humans paraded hundreds of different Canis lupus variations, each bred for specific traits: size, color, temperament, purpose. He watched as small human children fearlessly interacted with creatures that should have ripped them apart. He visited what humans called a zoo, where they kept partially domesticated specimens of even more dangerous creatures. Large felines from entry 28 through entry 35, ursids from entry 19 through entry 23, marine mammals, reptiles, birds of prey, and everywhere, the humans smiled. They petted the animals. They fed them treats. They spoke to them in gentle, affectionate tones. They took photographs to remember the experience. He met a woman who kept snakes as pets, constrictors capable of crushing a gravixian in their coils. She had 12 of them, named them, built special heated enclosures for them, fed them frozen rodents, cuddled with them while watching entertainment programs. He met a man who kept spiders. Entry 66 on the red list. The 8-legged horror. Known for toxic venom and tendency to hide in dark spaces before ambushing prey. This human had 40 species of them, in glass containers, in his living space, and he was actively trying to breed them. He visited an aquarium where humans had domesticated various fish species. He saw a demonstration of falconry, where humans trained raptors to hunt alongside them. He attended a county fair, where humans competed to see who had raised the largest pig, the most productive chicken, the finest cow. At every stop, he took extensive notes, recorded video, collected genetic samples, built a database that would make his original assignment look like a footnote. And throughout it all, one thing became increasingly clear. The humans hadn't just domesticated the red list species. They had formed bonds with them, emotional connections. They loved these creatures. They mourned when they died. They celebrated when they bred successfully. They spent enormous amounts of time and resources caring for them, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. On his final day on Earth, Threndel returned to Morris's farm. The old man was sitting on his porch, watching the sun set over his fields. His cattle were grazing peacefully. His dogs were lying at his feet. The evening air was full of the sounds of chickens settling into their roosts and pigs grunting contentedly in their pen. "Finished your inspection?" Morris asked, gesturing to the seat beside him. Threndel sat down carefully, his suit creaking. "I have collected enough data to keep the Council's analysis teams busy for several years." "Find what you were looking for?" "I'm not sure. I came here expecting to find either a massive database error or evidence of the most dangerous planet in the galaxy. What I found was—" Threndel paused, trying to find the right words. "Confusing. Your species has accomplished something that every other civilization considers impossible. You've taken the worst nightmares evolution could produce and turned them into family members." Maurice chuckled. "When you put it like that, it does sound a bit mad. But you have to understand, we didn't have much choice. We evolved alongside these creatures. They were here first, most of them. We couldn't leave the planet, couldn't avoid them. So we had to figure out how to live with them. And once we figured that out, well, why stop? But aren't you afraid? Don't you worry that one day they'll remember what they are, that they'll turn on you?" "Sometimes," Maurice admitted, "there are accidents. Dogs do bite, bulls do charge, bees do sting. But you know what? People hurt each other too, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident. That's just part of living alongside other creatures, human or otherwise. You accept the risks because the benefits are worth it." He reached down and scratched one of his dogs behind the ears. The animal's tail thumped against the wooden porch. "This old girl here, that's Madeline. She's been with me for 12 years, best friend I've ever had. Helped me through some dark times after my son passed. Was right there beside me every single day, never asked for anything but food and a warm place to sleep, and maybe a few scratches. That kind of loyalty, that kind of love. You can't quantify that in a risk assessment spreadsheet." Threndel watched the dog, this descendant of Entry 24 on the red list, press its head against the old man's hand with obvious affection. "Your species is insane," he said finally. Maurice laughed. "Yeah, we've been told that before. But it's worked out pretty well for us so far." That night, back in his shuttle, Threndel began writing his report. He wrote for 6 hours straight, documenting everything he had seen. Every species, every location, every interaction. He included video evidence, genetic analysis, statistical data on human-animal injury rates, comparative studies with other species domestication attempts, and then he reached the conclusion section, the part where he had to make his official recommendation to the Galactic Council about Earth's classification status. He stared at the blank screen for a very long time. What could he possibly say that would accurately convey what he had witnessed? How could he explain to the Council that humanity had achieved the impossible not through superior technology or military might, but through patience and empathy and an absolutely reckless willingness to trust creatures that should have killed them? Finally, he began to type, After extensive investigation of the Sol-3 system, I can confirm that the human species has successfully achieved long-term coexistence with 67 creatures classified on the absolute red list. This coexistence has been maintained through a process they call domestication, which involves selective breeding over multiple generations to modify behavior and physical traits to be compatible with human society. The humans have not only survived this process, but have thrived. They consider many of these creatures to be family members. They form emotional bonds with them. They grieve when they die. They have built entire industries around caring for them, studying them, and breeding them. From a statistical standpoint, human fatalities caused by these domesticated creatures are remarkably low. From a psychological standpoint, the benefits humans derive from these relationships appear to be significant. From a logical standpoint, none of this should be possible. Yet it is, and it has been for thousands of years, and the humans show no signs of stopping. My recommendation is as follows. The Terra system should be classified as a Category 12 anomaly, not because the humans are dangerous to other species. Based on my observations, they are actually quite friendly and welcoming to visitors, but because their approach to coexistence with apex predators is so fundamentally different from standard protocols that attempting to explain it to other civilizations could cause mass confusion and possible panic. The humans call their planet Earth. Perhaps we should let them keep it to themselves for now. At least until the rest of the galaxy is ready to accept that sometimes the most terrifying predators in the universe just need a good scratch behind the ears and a warm place to sleep. Threndel read over his report 3 times, added a few more pieces of evidence, attached approximately 6,000 files of supporting documentation, and then, with a heavy sigh that came from all 3 of his brainstems simultaneously, he filed it with the Bureau. 3 months later, he received his response. The Council had reviewed his report. They had analyzed the evidence. They had consulted with experts in xenobiology, evolutionary psychology, and risk assessment, and they had reached a unanimous decision. The Terra system was to be designated as under review pending further investigation. Thus, the humans would be permitted to continue their domestication practices without intervention. A small monitoring station would be established in orbit to observe long-term outcomes. And most importantly, the entire matter was to be classified at the highest level of security, because, as the Council's response delicately put it, the revelation that humans have successfully domesticated the entire red list could cause significant psychological distress to populations that have been taught since childhood to fear these creatures above all others. In other words, let's not tell anyone about this because it would make the entire Galactic Council look like cowards, and the humans look like lunatics, and nobody needs that kind of confusion in their lives. Threndel couldn't argue with that logic. He never returned to Earth. The memories were too fresh, too disturbing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that little girl, Amelie, hugging her dog, Luna. Every time he tried to relax, he remembered Maurice's cattle licking his suit with their enormous tongues. Every time he tried to enjoy his morning meal, he thought about Philippe's 8,000 bees investigating his face. But sometimes, late at night when his work shift was over and he was alone in his quarters, Threndel would pull up the images from his investigation, the photos he had taken, the videos he had recorded, and he would watch them with a mixture of horror and fascination and something that might have been admiration, because the humans had done something remarkable. They had looked at a universe full of creatures designed to kill them, and they had said, "What if we could be friends instead?" And somehow, impossibly, insanely, they had made it work. Threndel had spent his entire career cataloging dangerous creatures, documenting threats, warning civilizations about what to avoid. And in one 3-week visit to Earth, he had learned that maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous thing in the universe wasn't the creature with the biggest teeth or the deadliest venom. Maybe it was the species crazy enough to look at those creatures and see potential rather than threat. The humans had 67 red list predators living in their homes, on their farms, in their cities, and they didn't even think it was strange. To them, it was just normal, just part of being human. Which meant that either the humans were the bravest species in the galaxy or the most foolish, or possibly both simultaneously. Threndel was never quite sure which. What he was sure of was that he would never, ever look at a threat assessment checklist the same way again. Because somewhere out there, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, a little girl named Amelie was probably hugging her dog Luna and asking her parents if they could please get a cat too. And her parents were probably saying yes, because they were human. And that's what humans did. They collected apex predators like other species collected stamps. And somehow, they made it work. The galaxy would never quite understand how. But then again, the galaxy had never asked a human to explain it in terms that made sense to anyone except other humans, which was probably for the best. Because if humans ever managed to explain their domestication process in a way that other species could replicate, the entire Galactic Council would have to rewrite the Red List from scratch, and nobody wanted that kind of paperwork. Threndel certainly didn't. He had enough trauma from his Earth visit to last several lifetimes. 3 of his brain stems were still in therapy. His threat assessment systems had developed what his doctor called learned helplessness, and refused to alert him to anything anymore. And he had developed a nervous twitch in his eye stalks that activated whenever anyone mentioned the words dog, cat, horse, or particularly bee. But he had done his job. He had documented the impossible. He had verified that, yes, humans really had domesticated the entire Red List. And he had lived to tell the tale, which was more than he had expected when he first stepped off his shuttle onto Earth's surface. So when new junior analysts joined the Bureau and asked him about his career highlights, Threndel would smile his species' equivalent of a smile and tell them about his boring, routine investigation of a small planet in Sector Z9 plural Z Alpha. And he would watch their eyes glaze over as he described the tedious process of database verification and taxonomic classification. And he would never mention the part where he had been licked by a red list predator while a 6-year-old human laughed and called it a good girl. Some things were better left classified for everyone's mental health.